Good evening, everyone. I am your host, Jason Miles. And welcome to another episode of this Revolution Podcast. I do have to warn you guys, this is a pre-recorded episode. That's why I started on time. There you go. No fooling you guys. And this is an episode I've been looking forward to. As you guys know, maybe you don't know, I'll be working with the Revol Press guys who have been on the show a few times. Like Watson and Mello. I would say friends of show. I love the fact that they're metal, hardcore guys. Me and Mike always talk about, you know, old school metal because we're old dudes. So to be able to write about metal, you know, that's all I really want to do. I want to depress everybody with these. Let's talk about why Sammy Hagar era Van Halen is very important. You guys don't want to hear it? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the post-makeup era of Kiss. Ooh. In the late 80s and the 90s. It's an important era. I'm not talking Lick It Up, Vinnie Vincent era. We can get into all that today. Will we get into all that today? Probably not. Probably not. That's not exactly what we're going to talk about. Let me pull up the script here. I think you guys are going to enjoy this show. In this episode of This is Revolution, we delve into the intricate and often contradictory relationship between heavy metal and the political left. For decades, heavy metal has been both celebrated for its rebellious ethos and criticized for tolerating reactionary practices from casual misogyny to far-right ideologies. Yet, as David Burke's compendium from Revol Press, What's Left of Metal, argues, there exists within metal a powerful current of leftist social critique, challenging capitalist systems, authoritarian structures, and the commodification of culture. Metal, Burke and his contributors assert, is more than an outlet for rebellion. It is a space where leftist politics and radical critiques of power can thrive. I mean, I thrived in that world for years. I don't know how we're defining thrive, but I still release music in it. Financially thriving, not so much. As the compendium notes, metal is a space where the contradictions of modern life, alienation, repression, and exploitation are confronted head-on. Yet it is also a culture that has often been co-opted, commodified, neutralized by the very systems it seeks to challenge. This duality raises important questions. How does metal retain its radical potential while being recuperated into mainstream culture? Is there a leftist core to metal's ethos of resistance? Or is the genre too compromised by its reactionary tendencies? And as metal becomes more culturally legitimate in the global north, what's truly left of metal's subversive edge? Ooh. Goddamn eyelash. Our conversation today with David will explore these questions, focusing on the intersection of metal and leftist politics, the genre's potential to contribute to revolutionary praxis, and how metal's critique of society can be weaponized for the left in the contemporary moment of permanent crisis. Burke's collection challenges us to think critically about the role of extreme music in leftist organizing and cultural production, as well as how left commentators, metal musicians, and scholars can engage more deeply with metal's revolutionary potential. Please welcome, coming all the way from across the pond, David Burke.
Hi, Jason.
What's going on?
Firstly, thanks very much for having me on. I'm really excited to get into the fucking weeds of it today. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, please do.
Oh, great.
I'm wearing a live undead hoodie. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What am I even complaining about?
I do have to say, if there's any old school metal shirts you're looking for, there's a scene here in Baja, in Mexico, that is mind blowing when it comes to young people digging heavy music. And there's another friend of mine that's a metal fan that does podcasting. His name is Ben Burgess. He's got a show called Give Them an Argument. And he lives a couple doors down. And tomorrow, Friday, we are going to this place, and I'll send you a picture, brother, of the shirt wall, because they have and it's all bootleg, right? I don't give a damn, but it's like every band that you could think about wanting, and if you don't see it, you just walk over like, do you have any like Deicide long sleeves from their third record? Yes, we do.
Wow.
So, and then there's the shows here are kind of are really cool as far as and I think we both live in places where these things are hard to do. There's this guy that owns a cafe. He took an old movie theater, put a cafe in it. He shows movies for free, right? Then behind the cafe was behind the theater was a massive amphitheater that was kind of crumbling. And he just lets kids throw shows there in this massive amphitheater.
Oh, sick.
Free shows. They put up a little skate thing, not a full skate park, but like skate stuff. So there's kids skating. There's mosh pits, and the young bands are going. It's like, it's the most beautiful thing you can see. You see generations of like old school headbangers, like really, really little kids. And you know where we live, you could never do that consistently because you're paying for the space, insurance, police.
Yep.
You know, all the things that make that stuff difficult. So there's a organic scene here that is kind of a beautiful thing. And I always tell people that are fans of like heavy and aggressive music, like, you got to come see this stuff. It's so insane to witness. But I do want to ask you, as a scholar of metal,
yes,
how do you define what heavy metal is? Because when we get caught up in genres, then we start, being marketing executives in our own mind.
Yes.
And for me, what's heavy isn't always distortion and double bass. Some of the heaviest stuff to me came out of the UK in the 90s, out of like Bristol. A lot of the trip hop stuff to me was such a combination of like punk and hip hop and like weird spy music in the 60s. Like Massive Attack to me can have some real heavy songs. For you, how would you define heavy metal?
Oh, right. So I've been thinking about this because I've just handed off my first draft of my literature review of my thesis.
Okay.
And one of the biggest issues that I came across kind of reviewing metal studies literature is when people talk about metal, they're actually normally talking about one of two different things. One of them is an assemblage of musical works, genres, and interrelations between pieces of music, right? And it's very much focused on, well, you can hear the influence of X in that. You can hear this band in this other thing. And that leads us down the path very much of the marketing executive in your head. Not always actually a marketing executive. People do take some ownership of genre and make their own understandings. But I also totally understand the suspicion insofar as like isn't it awfully neat that you just happen to follow the prescribed boundaries defined by music executives. The other side to metal though, and to all cultures. So on one hand you've got the works, and then the other side you've got the social end of it, like the social structures that people build, how people interact with them, and so on. Defining metal is such a difficult. In some ways, it's very easy and succinct, and and in other aspects, it's very very complicated. Like for instance, what you were just touching on there, trying to define heaviness is difficult because it doesn't stick to one genre. There's heavy qualities to lots of different kinds of music. Like you listen to like a sad Bob Dylan song or like a Jackson C. Frank song.
Mhm.
You know, that's one way of approaching this thing that in the 60s people used to go heavy man about. I think for it to be metal though, it's got to have distortion.
Okay.
That is the musical signature of metal compared to other genres. You know, you can have very aggressive dance music that is still clean sounding and isn't overly harshly produced. But when when a metal song has a clean section in it, that's always laden with the assumption that we're going to return to something louder.
So would you call the Prodigy metal?
Oh, the Prodigy definitely have got like, and here's the other thing, right? Does it have riffs?
Okay.
And that's not helpful. That's not actually necessarily a hard and fast either. One of my supervisors has this idea that black metal doesn't really have riffs; it just has chords. I'm not sure if that's always true all the time. I think some black metal has riffs, but also some black metal doesn't have riffs. It's just a 4-chord sequence and beats and shrieking. But I think the overriding thing is that it's got to have guitar, it's got to have distortion, and if that distortion's not being generated by guitar, then we're already starting to stray away a little bit from metal. It's the instrument with the excessive volume and gain is the musical signature. But then culturally, how does that come out? Like the shirt that I'm wearing right now, the Terrorizer, and you're wearing a Slayer shirt, and already from those two words, we can start to intimate the kind of thematic cluster that metal orbits, which some scholars have referred to as the chaotic. Some scholars call it just extremity. I think that it all has a kind of relation to Jacques Lacan's concept of the real, which is the things that get outside of symbolization, the things that we fail to express, and the things that and the part of existence that we cannot properly make sense of or access. That all is given form in the extreme and intense visions of despair and destruction that metal so revels in.
Now that actually kind of leads me to the first question. You talk about a radical toleration for reactionary politics in metal, and I definitely feel like that is a 90s phenomenon, a post end of history phenomenon. And I say that because if you go back and look at all of the bands, let's say the thrash bands, because that's going to be the more cutting edge, more transgressive end of metal in the early days. Let's just put our definition for metal. We're not going to go back to Blue Cheer and the Kinks. Let's just say it's the new wave of British heavy metal. So late 70s onward, right? And the thrash into that, those guys, a lot of them are wearing like CCP shirts. Paul Bailoff famously would always have his Russian hockey jersey on, or Soviet era hockey jersey on. But as political as some people saw that music, a lot of it was really apolitical, right? They're against things that they're not really ever going to deal with. The draft is over, so they can be anti-war all they want. There's no real wars going on that they're even talking about, right? Disposable Heroes is not about Grenada, right? They're kind of abstract concepts, kind of shaking a fist at this man that probably isn't really oppressing these suburban kids.
Much
But
in the same way that movies like Platoon or Full Metal
oh
Jacket, they're already understanding it nostalgically.
yeah. Could you explain this concept of a radical toleration, if you will, for reactionary politics, and how
Sure.
that shapes metal culture, and how the left still finds a space in this music?
Yeah. So like metal's relationship with politics is odd compared
Yeah.
to the other popular musical cultures, because things like punk, but also things like reggae, and even to some extent rave, and obviously hip hop, have socially critical uh, aspects to the genre, which sometimes are the thing that overwhelms the genre and is its defining quality. Certainly in punk, is like social criticism is meant to be part of what the genre is about, and that in most cases produces something which at the most basic is a kind of a lumpen right-wing libertarianism, like the Ramones, for instance. And this can proceed all the way through to people that actually read critical theory and actually do praxis, like, I don't know, Crass or Gang of Four. Um, but metal's relationship to politics, even as we were saying, like even in the 80s, where you got lots of bands who appear to be very, on it and socially critical, the way that they're doing this has has a fantasy quality to it, right? Like when Metallica writes songs about soldiers, and they're obviously there's a message that war is hell, but it's not a fulsome critique of hegemony. It's not an understanding of how
Hmm.
of why countries go to war. It's
Hmm.
the sensuous qualities of being in combat get pulled to the fore and left there open for interpretation in lots of cases. Hence the famed controversy over Angel of Death by Slayer. That song is written uh, from the perspective of Joseph Mengele, and if you are an uncharitable reader, you might look at that song and see it as an endorsement of his actions. Personally, as a Jewish person, when I read that song, I don't get that impression, but that's by the by. The concept of radical toleration turns up in a book from 1999. The guy is studying music scenes in Akron, in Ohio, and he speaks to a death metal musician there who says that in death metal scenes at the time, it was it didn't really matter what politics you had, didn't matter how far to the left or to the right. The idea was in death metal in the death metal scene, you take all that stuff off at the door. It's not really important. We're here to talk about music, and the politics can wait outside to some extent. Slash, we will allow all politics in, and it's just not anybody else's business. And I think you can see kind of where this sort of the most basic stance that one often has as a popular music fan who has any degree of social criticism is this kind of unconstructed right libertarianism, where it's like, well, I'll tolerate whatever crazy shit you got going on, and you can do the same for me, and that will be enough. But this worked very much in that kind of end of history moment, as you said, right? Like when a lot of the major political conflict, when the major sort of ideological conflicts seemed to be abating, um, it was much easier for metal to be unreflective in its politics, and in fact, for politics to kind of stand aside as just one of those things that people have arguments about, not something that actually has meaningful consequences. And I think you can see this running all the way through the 2000s to some extent in metal culture as well. And around the middle of the 2010s, things start to shift really noticeably. And I think we cannot help but associate that with the broader socio-political changes that have happened in the past decade, where we now have a much more politically active socius.
Yes, where hyper politics have taken over, and it's kind of it's the word of the day, and I don't like it.
And it's run straight into metal. Like metal now has that. Metal now has lots of people who are much more aware of politics and trying to do politics within metal, often from a left liberal perspective. And what
Gojira,
started,
yeah,
yeah, Gajira
yeah,
is one example,
Gojira,
but
yeah.
also down to a revitalized interest in keeping reactionary politics out of local metal scenes. That has appeared
And I
anew
don't know,
in the past 10 years.
yeah, I don't know how I feel about that because I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's been a lot of when certain bands come to town, people want to protest the show because this is a fascist band, blah blah blah, black metal
Mhm.
band. What is it about black metal and fascism, or neo folk and fascism, like these two genres? What is it about that go?
They're fundamentally reactionary. To me, they're fundamentally reactionary. And
Okay.
they have this they both have an obsession with a mythic past,
Ha,
and and even when black metal tries to make itself more forward-looking, more politically progressive, it still
mhm.
ends up relying on reactionary tropes, but trying to position them as no, but these are the good ones. Living
Yeah,
amongst
yeah.
no, these are the right reactionary tropes. Like it's hating people for their blood, bad, but living amongst nature and never having to interact with modernity, oh, that's good, is it? um, um, that's fine. So I think black metal has. I've written about this before. I think black metal has an inherently reactionary streak to it. Now that doesn't mean that you can't make good black metal, or that just because something has a reactionary turn to it that it's not a worthwhile artistic genre. But it absolutely lends itself. Absolutely. I mean,
What do you think about this idea of because all what's interesting to me is always when genres, I shouldn't say genres, when artists aren't afraid to explore. And if we stay on black metal for a minute, once it got away from its geographic roots and starts to really, younger people in the States are playing it. There are these kids from the Bay Area, actually from a little further south in the Central Valley, called, oh God, they had an album called Sunbather.
oh, Death
I don't
Heaven.
know. Deaf Heaven, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, they are known as an atmospheric
Hmm.
black metal band. And I remember I was asking a friend how they felt about it. And they're like, nah, that's kind of wimpy. It's like, I want my black metal to be a certain way. And I think this is a little too, they said wimpy. And I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I thought it was a funny analogy. What do you think about this atmospheric black metal? I don't even know if that genre is over now because, people are trying to catch on to what's hot. I heard another band that kind of reminded me of them, but maybe more serious in the black metal side, called Guerrera, I believe, from Portugal.
Gaera or
Guerrera, yeah.
Gaia or whatever it is. Yeah.
Kind
So
of badass. Yeah.
so this is an interesting thing, right? Because like black metal has been trying to get over the Norwegian stuff, what's
Hmm.
called second wave.
Hmm.
The rest of metal has been trying to get over that since it happened because people died during that scene.
Died,
And yeah,
murdered.
people were literally murdered. And after that, where do you go? Right? The
Mhm.
the the logic of breaking taboos and upsetting the apple cart and pissing off your parents reaches a zenith when you're literally stabbing people. It's very hard to get beyond in transgressive terms, beyond murder. I guess the only thing beyond that would be mass murder or something worse. You know, like it's pretty terrible what you'd have to do to get beyond that. And frankly, most metal bands don't have the stones or the organisation to actually follow through, so that's not going to happen. So rather, the whole culture has spent 30 years trying to achieve it. And as black metal moved into America and got historically further away from this, the third wave of black metal opened up, which was much more femme, softer, more reflexive, and more politically progressive. Now, in some ways, this has been very good. Black metal has been wrested from its reactionary roots to some extent, and there's now a swath of progressive black metal bands, LGBTQ people in black metal, which is new, more people of color in black metal, which is also relatively new. These are good things. However, the aesthetic has changed, and it's gone from raw, hyper aggressive, just beating things and shouting, to things that are more melodic, more related to various genres of indie music. So shoegaze and indie rock have kind of joined into black metal, and that's what a lot of the post-black or atmospheric black or black gaze is about.
Hey,
yeah.
Is that a slur?
Right. And here perhaps might be the slip that people like get in, that your friend gets in on, right? Because it is a softer kind of music. It's less concerned with the of freezing to death in a forest on your own, and more to do with death. You know, Death Evans' lyrics are about dying while living in San Francisco. It's a different kind. It's a different kind of dying. It's more urban. It's more concrete. And this it produces different reactions. Do I like it? I like some of it. It depends on the artist, but increasingly the kinds of metal that I listen to are not melodic, but neither are they like the raw, just let's play 4 chords over and over again kind of thing either. I tend to listen to like things that are inspired by jazz, especially, because then it's because I like things that are very I want it to be unpredictable. I don't want to know what's going to come next.
Interesting. Very interesting. In the compendium, you posed the question, what is metal about leftism and what is left about metal? Could you elaborate on this idea? In what ways can metal's aesthetics and ethics be mobilized to support leftist political projects? And how can left movements embrace metal's radical potential? I found this interesting, even when Mike was talking to me about it, because I come from both worlds in a way, metal and punk.
Yeah.
And I think they both have a lot of positive qualities, and I think they both have a lot of negative qualities within the cultures. Tell me about what's left of metal.
So metal, as I was saying before, metal doesn't, on the face of it, metal doesn't have much to offer a left politics, because it seems to be unremittingly focused on breaking social taboos, having a kind of unhealthy obsession with various kinds of fantasy, and a similar unhealthy obsession with violence of all kinds.
Yeah.
Rationally, it's not very good for left politics. Punk is much more rational in its left politics. You know, when a punk decides that they've had enough, song called I've Had Enough, and it's about how they've had enough, right? There's a clarity of expression in punk, which is always sought. We're trying to say the right thing, we're trying to stick it to the man, and then, well, we have to support this culture in the rational correct way to do politics. So we'll have some community gardening. We'll try and set up a venue space. We'll do a zine. We'll bring like safety equipment and prophylactics that we give away at gigs for free, because that's what people should have. It's all very rational, very sensible. What my contention, however, is that metal speaks very well to the left's irrational side, the left of the great sentences in Marx, right? Of the spectre that haunts Europe, right? Like the fantastical elements that we end up bringing in when we describe the horrors of capitalism. Like, it's almost not enough to use punk terms like how, you know, disgraceful it is, you know, or how appalled it makes you feel, or what an injustice it is. You need to say that it's a horror, the world that we live in. There's now, so I think metal, in its doom-laden sketches of the world, is actually an extremely effective communicator of the left's imaginary and its and the side of it which it doesn't want to be front and center. The left sees itself as the reasonable side in politics, quite rightly. It is more rational, but because of that, the case is almost always presented rationally. You know, we have these good policies. It's more sensible that we do it this way. We're going to plan things rationally. All well and good, completely on board, but we need something that accommodates irrationality into the left. And I think metal is a culture that's very well placed to do that in some important ways.
Interesting. Is there a demarcating line anymore like there used to be between punk and metal, or do you see that line extremely blurred now? I feel like before, musicianship and class were kind of big demarcating lines between the two genres, especially the early days of punk. It's super arty. You know, these are like art school kids slumming, if you will. And I don't know if that line is there anymore. I think the distortion quality between both genres is there, as we have equal access to cheap and used equipment. A band labeled hardcore punk, a band labeled metal, they're probably both playing through amplifier modelers through their computers, you know, in 2024. Is there really a difference between these two genres anymore, like there was, let's say, 1982? There's massive differences between Anthrax and Black Flag. Now
these two genres have, sorry, these two
no,
genres have
go ahead.
always
No, go ahead.
interacted. There's
I
always
agree.
been a kind of they've always kind of they've always co-interacted with each other, and in fact, one's action often spurs the other. Like the existence of punk really spurs Motorhead into existence, and Motorhead helps speed up the whole of heavy metal as a result. When Black Flag put out My War, they generate a whole new genre of metal off the back half of that record, sludge. These two things have always co-interacted. These two things have always co-interacted, and in fact, they help each other a lot. But at this point, it is very hard to tell them apart in loads of different ways. You might still point to the idea that metal is a bit more technically minded. It's one way, for instance, that I could sum up the difference is that punk is still a garage genre. It's a genre to play in your space where you can make noise with your friends. And there's a basic kind of social quality to it. Whereas metal has long been a bedroom genre, a genre that you write riffs in your little room, and maybe you get your friends over sometimes, but you could also, in these enlightened days, you could record the whole thing on your computer and never have to talk to a single other soul while you make that music. So I think one way to separate them is this basic stance of who is this for and where is it made. But in a broader sense, and a more kind of more theoretical, punk is about the concrete. Punk is about real social situations, and things that have social consequences, like who's allowed to be in the club, who are we going to kick out, for instance. Metal sometimes talks about the concrete world. Of course, we already discussed like classic thrash bands; they were very interested. But there's also this abiding interest in what is not here that is in metal. Show me the number of punk songs about wizards and warlocks and dragons and zombie
Metal
and
loves
zombie
their dragons,
armies.
dude. Yeah, yeah. Metal loves
Metal
fantasy.
lives in a metal. I think articulates fantasy,
Yeah.
where other genres articulate metaphors or allegory or things that relate to concrete situations and are like allegorical for them. Whereas metal's fantasies do relate to the real world, but they are also quite in another world of their own. But again, I want to relate back to the previous question. I want to
Mhm.
stress that this is very important for a future left politics. It's not enough, basically, to offer people a rational vision of the future and of utopia, especially because all the rational visions of utopia are deathly boring. They're not fun. They're
Yeah.
not fun or exciting, and metal, in a very kind of boneheaded way, really grasps what is fun and exciting. Um, and this, I feel, has to be incorporated into the left's future. We can't
So if
just expect ourselves to go to meetings all day and do fitness in the evening and have a nice time, because people, I don't think people
Mhm.
are like.
So then is black metal the kind of is black metal the so is your perfect example like black metal, like look, if you have the perfect society where you have actually a social safety net and people are supposed to do all the things to stay happy, and if you're not, realistic about your situation, a reaction could be a return to uh, Nazism musically.
Well,
That's
this
that's an
is
interesting that's an interesting perspective.
multiple commentators have pointed out that the black metal scene, which produced literal murder and burning
Hmm.
and arson, was generated out of upper middle class Norwegians who
Hmm.
had amongst the highest quality of life it was possible to have in the 1990s. It is really quite remarkable in politically that such a reactionary genre would emerge from such high quality of life. But I think this is precisely what we need to understand, is that when people experience massive privilege and social welfare, they get very bored and need to come up with some kind of project, because otherwise they'll start doing worse things to each other. There is like
Yeah.
there's like and the other way to pass that is think about how many people, when they talk about what would they like to do the day after the revolution, so many of them are like, well, I would like to be writing poetry in the day and hunting in the evening and talking at night, just like Marx says at one
Hmm.
point in his books, to have that unalienated labor. Now, what I worry about is that um, people will find this this will be too much like Christian heaven, and people get bored after a while.
Hmm.
Even if and also we have to accept the idea that if everybody is so into doing artistic projects, we need some way of organising this so that everybody's project gets a gets a hearing and that
Hmm.
people turn up.
Hmm.
So one of my, this is slightly unrelated to metal, but one of my ideas about like what a socialism would look like, it would involve mandatory visits to your friends' cultural project. So when it's time to go and see your neighbour's dance recital or your cousin's or your cousin's flower show, you have to go. It's the law to go, actually.
That's how you get people to buy tickets to that metal show.
Yes, and now you can start to see whether pieces goes light on quickly. Sorry.
It's so funny, you know. I was watching an interview with you, and you are a promoter in the UK. What city are you in, by the way?
I live in Bristol at the moment, but I used to.
No way.
Yeah. Who do you know?
You live in the most magical place. For me, that's like holy ground.
House? Oh, because you were saying before
for me musically,
hip-hop.
even though I grew up listening to like different stuff, and I'm from the Bay Area where a lot of interesting music comes from. For the 90s, when I graduated high school in 1995, and I think Portishead's first record is around that time, Dummy.
Yeah, that's right.
And I worked 94. So yeah, I worked in a bookstore across the street from the University of California, Berkeley when I got out of high school, and that bookstore played Dummy all the time. And I remember hearing it and being like, "What is this? I've never heard anything like this." And I ran over to the people that were playing the music, like, "Oh, it's Portishead," and I was like, to me, this was the most revolutionary shit I'd ever heard in my life. Like, I've never heard these different. It sounded cool. There was a heaviness to it. There was a badassery to it. And then when I hear, I think Massive Attack's like second record, I was like, Jesus Christ, Mezzanine. I was like, Jesus Christ, this record is so freaking sick. And I got to go record in Bath in 2013.
Oh, sick.
And Jeff Barrow had been there before, and I was geeking out all over the board, like, "Is this the one he touched?" Like, I was like,
wow. Do you know they still live around here as well?
Word.
Like, I think the three of them are all still relatively local to the area. So like, and I don't think they get out as much, but I know people. I haven't lived here that long, but I know people that have been here for years and years, and they've seen them around at gigs occasionally and that kind of thing. So they are still vaguely part of it.
And then there's like an art scene that comes from Bristol. That's where a lot of Black folks are in Bristol.
Yeah.
So I really dug that area when I was down there.
It's got more culture.
Yeah.
Than a lot of the rest of the south of England. I've got to say, like it's got a really good metal scene at the moment as well, especially the grindcore scene, which I'm sort of fairly bound up in. But that stuff has gone really overboard in the past couple of years, and I think partly it's because metal is just popular right now, but also there's kind of been a post-COVID itch for a lot of people to actually start getting out and doing things again, and like a lot of kids seem to be taking the premise of live music a lot more seriously perhaps than they would have when they took it for granted 10 years ago.
Bless you. There's I want to ask you this question before we get to more serious questions about theory and stuff. There's these two genres of metal, and one is infamously kind of looked down upon, and the other has this nostalgia that I feel like will never die. Nu metal and hair metal.
Oh, great.
I used to ask my friends this question when we'd be hanging out at post gigs, and I used to say, because nu metal for me was interesting. There were some bands from that scene that I thought were doing things that were really pushing the limits of these kind of hip hop and metal genres, and not necessarily with rapping in it. Like, I think Deftones really did something with that genre. They're their own thing. They're like Cure core, if you want to put a core on the back of everything. But mixing it with the hip hop that they were coming up with in Sacramento and the Bay Area, and in a way that to me was very different than a band like Limp Bizkit.
Yeah.
Korn doesn't necessarily rap, but you can hear that hip hop influence because these are the guys that are growing up in the MTV generation, and MTV is totally different than radio because radio is these are the stations for these types of music, whereas MTV is we're kind of throwing it all at you. Eventually they get programming, but at first it was just we're just going to kind of throw a lot of new wave and rock at you, and that's just what it is. And maybe eventually we'll throw some hip hop in there if it's big enough. So these are the guys that are growing up with this menagerie of stuff, music. But there's a massive backlash to it. Did that backlash to you feel a little racist?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Are you kidding me? Right. So I've got to stress. I was not there at the time. I am too young to have been there at the time. However, there's a great thesis by a guy called Eric Smirlek, and he points out that when a genre is too popular and too demographically far away from the trad metal archetype of white dude,
okay.
When you get too far away, when a genre that's popular gets too far away from that, it gets abjected, is how Eric puts it, by the trad metal fan base and the mediators that look after that fan base, the journalists and so on. Now, when this happened to glam metal, it was called, and we were already talking about this before the call, things like light metal, wuss metal, even I heard occasionally. But the ultimate thing that it was really referring to was that this was metal that girls liked, and the people in the music looked a little bit more femme. They were wearing makeup at a certain point, and the hair is really big. They're wearing skin tight outfits. They're playing with gender in a slightly more ambiguous way than your typical thrashers or even trad metal guys, even in the leather. I know, obviously, Rob Halford is doing his own kind of plot with sexuality and gender, but a lot of metalheads that went straight over their head and nobody really cared / understood until the 90s. When this happened to glam, this was very much focused on this is women's metal, and there was a lot of sexism written into the genre to that effect. When it happens in new metal, it's very obviously racist. It's very obvious, like not just the backlash against the genre, but also parts of the way that the genre precedes itself. Like, for instance, you were just pointing out the difference between like Deftones and Limp Bizkit. I would contend that Deftones is a much more sympathetic and thoughtful way of white people incorporating hip hop than Limp Bizkit is.
And Deftones are people of color, right? We don't talk
true.
about that, right?
No,
Chino
that's
is of Latin and Asian descent. Stephen Carpenter is Latin. Frank the DJ is Chi was mixed as well. So there's this acceptance for a minute of people of color in the genre, especially the drummers, right? There's crazy good drumming in new metal, but it's the sonic difference for me is getting rid of the mid-range scoop, and we're going to have a wall of tone, and we're going to get rid of the solo because we just don't need it. And I know a lot of people kind of leaned in on there's no solos and everybody's got a DJ and But if you look at bands, again, like Incubus and Deftones, the way that DJ is used is not used in this almost satirical way. Chicka, 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 chicka. Like that's satirical.
Like it's almost like a parody of turntablism.
Yeah, they're not when you watch, and I don't know how you feel about Incubus, but again, like the Deftones have kind of drifted into their own thing. But if you listen to some of their records in the late 90s into the early 2000s, that DJ has a turntable at his station, but he's also got crazy modular synths, and he might be playing chord textures, or the record for like the Deftones, that record playing may be a texture to the song, and there's not really scratching over it. And I always thought that was real interesting to truly make that person a musician, where they got to have all these different things at their disposal.
Right.
Um,
Right.
because some of the metal,
As opposed to Slipknot, where do you know the Slipknot joke?
what's that?
How many members of Slipknot does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
Well, you need about 4, and then you need 5 guys to run around doing fuck all.
Dude, when they first hit, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't get it. I'm still not the hugest fan, whatever.
So I kind of want to light on this conversation, on this moment actually, and Slipknot especially, right? Because this leads back to what I was saying before about, like, there's a difference between the works and the people that make them and appreciate them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when new metal has these, and all of these abjected subgenres, so metalcore and deathcore are also kind of in a similar status, right? Where the majority of true metal fans don't like these genres, but they're clearly in the style, but because they are associated with a group of people that are outside of the hegemonic demographic, they get pushed aside. But it's also because these are more pop-oriented musics, and they have fewer of the aspects that are associated with traditional metal. So new metal doesn't have solos. Metalcore has a lot of the right features, but then the harsh vocals aren't the whole way through. They have a pop punk chorus in the middle. Glam metal songs clearly have riffs, but they also and they do have solos, but the chorus, but they spend too long on the choruses, and it's not and it sounds too much like a pop song. But so there are these like things that people can point out and be like, oh yeah, well I actually don't like it because of this musical thing. But I also think in the same stroke, you can't dissociate those kinds of criticisms from the demographic criticisms that are also being made about the fans of those genres.
Yeah, because when you think about like hair metal, there's always this nostalgic look at it. And people, those guys can still play to this day. The bigger names can. They basically don't tour as hard as they did, and they can't draw the crowds they once did. I'm talking about the smaller guys. Guns N' Roses is still going to do arenas because that was the biggest band around. Let me add this to the question: does grunge, which again is a made up term, does that music fit in metal for you, or is that more punk for you, or does it depend on the band? Because Alice in Chains for me, sounds like everybody
metal.
on the Sunset Strip from that era.
They're metal.
So yeah.
I think grunge is like as you suggested, like grunge is really nebulous as a term. Like it's really hard to get a clear guide on it. But I think look, if grunge is Nirvana, and it kind of has to be because they're the biggest band, and they're the biggest band that ever held the name. If grunge is Nirvana, then grunge is punk. Grunge is a punk music. But Alice in Chains were always such an interesting case because they're clearly really more like a hard rock or almost like a stoner rock band at points.
Yeah.
Like Soundgarden are kind of similar. Like they're much more. They're also much more clearly from a hard rock kind of trajectory than Nirvana are, which is clearly like a punk band sensibility where it's not about writing good riffs. It's about a 2-chord song. These lyrics that I wrote this morning, great. Well, it's got the vibe, and that'll do. Whereas like, you listen to the way Lane Staley sings, it's like this was all thought through. This took practice. This is put together, and that has a more of the kind of metal idea, the original metal idea of we're gonna play rock to millions of people, and obviously we can do that because we're going to be louder than everybody else, so we'll reach more people. Simple. Whereas the punk way of how do we play to lots of people is, well, let's go to small venues and make the connection that we have while we're there actually meaningful, rather than just doing commercial entertainment for the masses. And there's always, like, Nirvana has always got that, has got still a bit of that kind of punk spirit to it, I think. But grunge is always so weird. Like, it's not a real genre in the way
Yeah.
that in the way that, like, glam metal has, like, a musical and social reality that map to each other.
Yeah.
Whereas grunge is like levels deciding, well, we've got all of these, like, hard rock adjacent bands, and one of them has just blown up. So let's just put them all roughly in the same box, and we'll see what happens.
Because another thing for grunge is like, yeah, everybody from Seattle gets signed, and we're going to call it this thing. But there's all these other bands that aren't from Seattle that, to me, that also kind of fall under that moniker. God, what do they call it from Chicago? Oh, I can't think of their name. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Smashing Pumpkins.
Oh, Smashing Pumpkins, yeah.
You know, that's a.
You know,
They were
like,
classified when they come out.
That's right. But then they sound like a prog rock band, or progressive, or progressive indie, I guess. Like, and their vision, like, Melancholy has such a different vision of what heavy alternative rock is meant to be compared to Dirt or Nevermind. Like, they all have roughly the same kinds of gain level, and they all have, which is important, because that does market that segments a market. You know, what's your tolerance for distortion? Like, they're all roughly in the same bandwidth, but their visions of what that music is meant to be are so different from each other. Whereas you look at, like, the iconic albums from the big four of thrash, and it's like, yeah, there's a consensus here.
They all have
what this thing is
there's
about.
There's a sonic through line, and I'd actually, one of my good friends is Kerry King's tech, and one day we were asking about, I was like, hey, I saw this video about the sound, the thrash sound, and it's supposed to be this. He goes, oh yeah, dude, it's a reverse happy face on the equalizer with any tube screamer. And then he goes that's what the Bay Area thrash sound is. He goes, trust me, you know, that's just what it is. JC 800.
Or like the Sunshine Studio sound in for Swedish death metal is just like, take the HM2, everything goes to 10.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a sonic through line, right? There's a sonic through line, and for grunge, you don't have it, because again, Alice in Chains doesn't sound like Mudhoney. That definitely doesn't sound like the Melvins. Doesn't sound like Tad. Doesn't you know? Like, all these bands to me are just it becomes a fashion aesthetic. But that to me is what hair metal is, and for some reason, I think because nu metal comes out at a time where a lot of people are embarrassed of the fashion choices they made, maybe.
Yes. Sure.
That it doesn't have the same nostalgic look back, I think, as like hair metal, to the point where there's no, at least I haven't seen it, I'm sure it probably exists, there's no Steel Panther of nu metal.
Oh, this is really good. I love that.
Okay.
I love that. So, firstly, glam metal has a sense of humor, in a way that nu metal has. Metal has sad songs on occasion, but a lot of the time it's about, I drank too much and now my wife left me, or my girlfriend. Or whatever.
Country music, yeah.
It kind of, yeah, like 18 and Life by Skid Row is a song about a boy who drinks too much and ends up killing his mate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's sad. But nu metal is angsty. You know, when nu metalers get down to writing a song, it's about, I think I'm going to kill myself unless, I don't know, something happens involving some horrible Oedipal drama, seems to be most of the time. Now, I think part of the reason that there's like, when there was a glam metal revival, there was this Are they ironic though? Were they ironic, Steel Panther, or was it just a straight revival? Who can even tell at this point? But there was this kind of playfulness associated with with its revival, whereas this time it has not happened in the same way. But Limp Bizkit got back together, and Fred Durst now does his performances ironically. He dresses up as an old guy, wears the fake beard and stuff, and plays up the silliness of his act. But I agree, it's not the same. Um, However, I do
Yeah.
think that like the new metal revival, I think is also an age thing. Like
Mhm.
people that are a bit older than me, like in their
Mhm.
mid 30s now, they are going for it real hard on the new metal revival thing because that was their teenage music.
Gotcha.
Whereas I think so it's a little and that might be that's not as immediately evident on the scene level of metal. Like there hasn't really been a new metal revival in the scene, which I think maybe that's also something worth taking note of because glam metal did get a scene level revival. There were small bands that started doing that kind of thing again. Whereas this time, new metal hasn't really been revived as much as hip hop and metal are back, but in a different way this time. Like trap and metal have
Yeah.
crossed over a lot more, and
Yeah.
like death grips type acts are becoming more
Yes.
popular as well. Like where it's just like a drummer and a white guy screaming over like laptop noises. Um, which is good. I'm glad that there's a new band that people are in. Like, it's good. It's good that there's a new formula for doing a band because it can't be two guitars, one bass, and drums is going to get stale eventually. Fine, but I think it is well worth kind of chewing over this and how these genres get revived because like when glam got revived it was, oh, wasn't this silly? Wasn't this a great, stupid, silly party that we all got to have in the 80s? Whereas when new metal gets revived, um, there's been a lot more kind of chewing it over because it's still such big generations of metal fans, as you were kind of suggesting.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be if there is a true new metal revival because I think that there's this thing called Deftones worship.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there was Black Sabbath worship. There still is. There is not. That is not past tense. Let me refrain. There is
Fortunately.
still Black Sabbath worship, right? And rightfully so. But can we get more Dio era Black Sabbath worship, please, people? More Dio era. Thank you. It's heaven and hell. But there's a band from your hood, and by your hood I mean the entirety of the UK, called Loathe.
Right. Yes.
And I found them.
There's one from your end of the woods called Spirit Box. I have no idea which state they're from.
Are those the guys that were from that band I Wrestled a Bear Once?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, I think they're from Louisiana.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
they're from northern Louisiana.
Yeah.
That song "Sun Killer" by Spirit Boxes. I like this song a lot. I
But
like this song a lot.
but they're also both of those bands are doing this kind of Deftones revival thing, where it's not all of new metal is getting revived, just the cool bits, just the acceptable bits.
Just these cool bits. And there's a new thing that they're doing to it that I think the Deftones don't do, right? Like if you go back and listen to a Deftones song and listen to any of those two bands we just named, Spirit Box, Loathe, there's a ton of these kind of Deftones ripoff. And there's Deftones ripoff bands that the Deftones toured with, like Glassjaw. I thought
Oh yeah,
there's lots of
yeah.
elements of Chinoisms, but they had their own thing. I'm not talking shit about Glassjaw. I actually recorded with Todd Weinstock, so that actually I'm a huge Glassjaw fan. But that band Loathe, for me, I was like, if this is the new generation of this stuff, these guys are really doing an amazing job of this. They've taken it and really made it their own thing. I really appreciate that. But if anything's successful, you get a million copycats.
And we're in a shit time for pop music now, like
Mhm.
in some major ways. Like as Mark Fisher pointed out, like the number of new genres that have emerged since the 2000s has massively diminished. So we're now at a point where the nostalgia cycles are getting faster. So things that
Yes.
were only happening 10 or 15 years ago are coming back after just a shorter revival period. But also, it's becoming. I was having a chat with a friend about this yesterday. It's becoming increasingly easy to see where a band has picked up its influence points from.
Hmm.
Because we're all so inundated with all of the reference points that have come before, and a lot of them just won't fuck off. Like a lot of these reference points won't die, and we're left with like not just cycles of nostalgia that we can't seem to get out of, but also they start to stack on top of each other. Nonetheless, I am glad to see bands like Loathe and Spirit Box, because ultimately what we need to accept is that the old bands are going to die, and do you want a covers band to replace them? Probably not. Well, what about something that's a legally distinct covers band? You know, somewhere where they technically do write their own songs, but it's obvious that this is a homage to a band in a certain style. And I think that's going to become very prevalent over the next 15 to 20 years as the kind of first generations of metal and broadly rock musicians die off, and Spirit Box and Loathe and that kind of thing are kind of amongst the first of this kind of new function in being a band, where it's obviously a tribute but not really.
Yeah, I really do think they're doing their own thing, because their heaviness comes
I
from a
agree.
different place. It
That's
comes from a different place. These guys are coming from a more grindcore, power violence. Like, they grew up with a bunch of different things. Whereas if I showed you real early Deftones stuff, you're like, is that a ska band? You know, so
Yeah, and in the same way,
that
like
band.
they,
Yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead.
they've also got that. No, they also got their weird influence set, but eventually it will get. But the thing is, like, eventually it gets synthesized into this certain kind of like radio-friendly metal where it's got riffs, but then it also has beautiful choruses, and not annoying beautiful choruses, like not happy clappy choruses like in
Yeah.
metalcore, like things that you can cry to with your girlfriend, which is very important. We need
It's
to
more
have metal that
Radiohead.
does that. Yeah.
If those, I believe in my soul that those kids listen to Radiohead.
Oh yeah.
I
Radiohead
believe.
and Radiohead and Deftones
Yeah.
are, to me, very close.
Yeah.
Very close.
Yeah.
And
The yeah. The Deftones are a heavy version of the Cure.
yeah. So this game, the way people make these associations. There's a really good article about how genre is like a constellation, which is, and
Hmm.
that metaphor's from Frederick Jameson, who just died,
Oh, just
R.I.P.
passed away. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
who just passed
Rest in
away.
peace.
And his idea was that genre is like the Milky Way. It's like a galaxy, and
Mhm.
all the stars are your different reference points. All of these different artists and stuff. And each person, because we're standing in different places, we look at the same information, but we read them slightly differently. We see the connections between them in slightly different ways. And so what we end up with, everyone has their kind of own zodiac, as it were, of different
Mhm.
constellations of how artists relate to each other. So,
Oh,
for instance,
that's actually really, that's kind of awesome, because it's that. Thank you for saying that, because it's really helping me as I'm writing this piece about the death of hair metal. Um,
nice.
because that is a beautiful way to think about genre and how we see it and how we put people in different boxes.
Right, because
Um,
like my Cure connection, the thing that the metal into the Cure link for me has always been King Diamond, because King Diamond, when he sings really high falsetto, he sounds just like Robert Smith.
I never thought about that. Okay.
When he goes really
Okay.
high, it's really similar to how Robert Smith goes really high. And the first time I heard King Diamond, I was like, wait, no, Robert Smith hasn't even invented singing this high yet. He doesn't even do this kind of singing yet. How are you ripping him off?
It took me a while to get into King Diamond. I'm not gonna lie, Spotify, as much as people like love to crap all over Spotify, I have as a person that did music for a long time, I still do to some extent. um I don't have the same relationship that these people that whine about it do, mainly because I knew I was never going to get on the radio. And if you didn't come to a show, there was no way you were going to hear what I had to offer. So
I have a negative relationship to Spotify, but for a slightly different reason.
sure.
I grew up on torrents and
Ah.
and MediaFire and all
Mm.
that kind of wonderful illegal downloading convention. And then when Spotify became ubiquitous, I felt it like an affront. I was like, no, you can't make me pay for this.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to do this. My entire childhood has consisted of downloading music illegally and finding more and more interesting ways to do it without getting viruses on my parents' computer and killing the computer. And now you're telling me that I have to pay a tenner?
Yeah.
Fuck off with you! Fuck off!
Yeah. So I want let's end with that question as we're coming up on
Let's
an
go.
hour. And thank you again, David, for hanging out with me. And
It's been a really nice chat.
I hope this leads to many more conversations as we do a music series on this show called there's a journalist that wrote this article about the 15 greatest years of music of all time.
Ooh.
And my friend and I that also is in a band. He's actually on tour right now, Conan Neutron and the Secret Friends. Him and I go over these years, and we go over every genre of music, and I make a playlist of one song off every album, full album that was released that year that I can find. So some of these playlists are like 20 hours long.
Wow, yeah, of course.
And they're in no genre order. It's totally random.
Oh my God.
It's an interesting, I think it's an interesting concept of the show because it's not us just I hate when people just bash on this is why we hate this record because this guy wrote it and he's fucking sucks. Like it's easy to do, and that plays into the apathy of the internet. And I think I've learned a lot about music doing this show because I didn't care that much about records that came out in 1967. And to find out that there's 2 records a year from some of these bands. But anyway, there is this idea that no one's buying music anymore because certain streaming numbers are down or no one's making money off streaming. And it was the funniest thing I heard someone say in one of these videos about what the record industry is really about. They were like, the record industry needs to create something that people can buy. And I was like a CD? Like a record? But this idea that no one's we're not making any money off streams and people aren't coming to shows and I'm like, well, music was made. The thing about Spotify that's great and horrible is I have access to basically all of recorded history in my phone or computing device. And if I want to play Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday, there's 15 versions of Billie Holiday's version, some remastered, some original. This is what she did live, right? And
you can do horrible things. You can listen to Strange Fruit and then go straight from that to listening to Johnny Rebel. There's nothing, there's nothing on Spotify to say you can't do that.
You can do whatever you can do whatever you want. It's all there. That being said, when you look at the numbers that, let's say, and this, we're going to get off the metal topic for a little bit. The Drake and Kendrick Lamar battle generated as far as streams for YouTube, right? Because they were dropping these albums on YouTube. Because if people don't know, you can't just put a record on Spotify. It actually takes a while.
Yeah.
And since these guys were just dropping songs at 2 a.m. Against each other, which I thought was actually really cool. Like Good mastered. We're not waiting for Bernie Grundman to master this. We're going to drop it on YouTube fresh out of the studio with a half-ass mix. Fuck you. Would it get those same plays and listens? Would people have ran to the store to go buy it had it been for sale? Or is it the fact that this stuff is free that we listen to it as much as we do? Because the ticket sales aren't adding up to the stream numbers.
No.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's just something you can just do passively.
And this is tough, right? Because it means like people that want to make a living out of music are have to eat shit on this because because the model by which fans go out and buy a record once a week and then go and see a show once a month, and most of their listening is curated by radio, and they really yearn for your release or for your show because their access is restricted. This fantasy is dead in the water. It is gone. You cannot get it back. The people that are complaining about that kind of making money out of music being gone, I'm sorry, but that is they are on a slow road to conservatism. Frankly, they see they see that something was taken from them and they want it back, but it's not coming back. We can't get the toothpaste back in the tube vis-a-vis streaming media. It's not going to happen. Yeah. Unfortunately, this is also not good. Artists are losing out. They're getting paid fucking nothing. For months and months of work. If it were me, I would be suggesting, of course, that all musicians have to be hired by the state so that they get paid, and that they should. But obviously that is completely far. That is far and away. I think we have to be in an uneasy position, right? It's not good to just to drag our feet about this and think that we can get back to some kind of era where we can actually make a regular living by being a band that plays that does like a couple of little tours a year and maybe puts an album out once every two.
Yeah.
Clearly, the way the way to make money now as a musician is you have to follow the algorithm, which seems to be incredibly dispiriting. You have to put out work all the time, and that's really draining as an artist. And on top of that, you have to make things about meme bullshit or whatever's in the fucking news that week, or you've got to have some kind of superlative technical ability and then film yourself doing it over and over and over again, and people watch you on Instagram. You know, these aren't good paths that are laid out for us either. But I think this ties into one of my main arguments that I want to make for the collection, for the essay that I'm going to write in there. Because I think I'm going to do my piece on there are a couple of power metal songs where they state the immortal epithet "metal is the law." Now I want to contend that metal, to survive its recuperative turn, the way in which it is always being all of its transgressive energy and its potential for a radical critique of existence, the way that this is always being turned back into products and Funko Pops, the way we change this is by doing a very counterintuitive move. I think we need to give metal over to the state more. We need to go up to the government and say louder voices and greater numbers that metal, actually, you do have to take this seriously, and this needs to be looked after in the same way that jazz was, or folk is, or classical music. This needs to be looked after, preserved, and actually incorporated into state culture. Now, we can already see this. It's already happening. We, the metal people that are doing metal, actually just need to seize it, because it's already fucking happening. It happened at the Olympics this year.
Yeah.
You know? So we're already at a point where metal is reaching a certain level of legitimacy, that it's being considered by international cultural event planners as being good enough to use. I think we actually have to push this further and say, look, you guys, you non-metalheads out there, you like it that we stay indoors and play riffs all day. That's good because it keeps a lot of autistic men out of the public eye and keeps them doing a hobby that they like. Wonderful, fine. But we need to then go back to them and say, give us some funding so that this continues. If you actually, we should be thinking about how to turn this into a musical tradition, in the same way that jazz became a full, respected, ossified, dead in some ways tradition of music. I think we have to chew an even bitterer pill, perhaps, and think the same for heavy metal.
Well, I'm on board. I can dig it. His name is David Burke. What's Left of Metal is the compendium coming out on Revol Press. I will be writing something for it. I'm excited. I'm excited. This whole thing has got me excited. You know, I want to bring you back on, possibly with Mike, and we could talk more about metal stuff. We should have a show where we argue, you know, something real simple, like you know, what's the best Metallica record out of the first four?
When we do that, I have a horrible anecdote for you about a person that I have not met personally, but have encountered, that has one of the worst takes on Metallica that I have ever heard.
I'm all in with 2 feet.
I would love to recount that, but I'll leave that as a teaser for another time, I think.
I love that. I love that. David, thank you so much. Wherever you're watching or listening to the show, there's actually a link in the description that will be for Revol Press, as Mike's book is coming out. He came on the show to talk about it. And Bram's book is already out, and I believe that's doing pretty well. So thank you guys so much for watching and listening. And
so much for having me, Jason, as well.
Oh no, this was fun. This was fun, and you're making me miss the UK. I'm getting a little sad and nostalgic in my mind. I'm thinking about all the fun I had playing out there. So thank you guys.
Pissing it down out here, by the way. It has been raining.
I don't miss that shit. Fuck that. We are out.